What up, Cavs Nation? I'm your host, Ethan Sands, and I'm back with another episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. And joining me today, Jimmy Watkins, cleveland.com columnist, and we're coming to you guys after the Cavs' latest win, 115-101 over the Philadelphia 76ers. And yes, the box score at the end of the game made this contest look much closer than it was or than it should have been. The Philadelphia 76ers were without Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Paul George, and VJ Edgecombe in tonight's matchup, while the Cavs did not have Jared Allen, did not have Max Strus, but were nearing full strength. Jimmy, this contest was the 40th win of the season for the Cavs. They're also 24-9 since December 29th. They're 16-5 since January 21st, and 8-1 in the last 9 games at home at Rocket Arena. Tonight, we knew that energy was going to be hard to come by, and the Cavs have struggled, as Kenny Atkinson mentioned before the game, in games like this, where they have to kind of create their own environment, create their own habits, and live to the standard that they have made for themselves throughout the entire season, especially as a team that wants to be a championship contender. What did you see from this Cavs team today? Obviously, they started slow, but they were able to lean on their stars and Donovan Mitchell early on, and James Harden, and even their role players like Keon Ellis, Jalen Tyson, and Dean Wade to help them get back in the win column.
I think you saw a team that has a better feel of its switch and has a better, more rev in its engine than maybe some of the earlier versions of this Cavs team did coming into tonight. The Cavs were 3-12 against the spread when favored by double digits entering this season. No one cares if you beat the gambling spread in the standings, but that is indicative of how this has kind of been a tough spot for them at times. And it's a natural letdown spot for a lot of teams in the NBA, particularly when the Sixers are missing every notable player. I mean, all their stars are out for one reason or another. Easy spot to let down. You kind of raised your eyebrow for about, 5-10 minutes in this game as the Cavs came out sloppy, but it's a testament to their firepower in the James Harden era. They're like, when they decide to turn it on, like they're back to that. We can end this game in 5 minutes type of firepower that they had last year. And like Kenny said after the game, there is a requisite maturity and seriousness to a win like this, because you see it all the time in this league, and particularly in the second half of back-to-back. Like, a team can play with their food 2 or 3.5 quarters at a time and not really be that worried or engaged until the end. So for this team to take care of it a little bit quicker is a good sign. The sign of anything in the future, not really, but it's a good thing for now.
And Jimmy, obviously a historical night. James Harden surpassing 29,000 career points, just the 9th player in NBA history to eclipse that margin. We've been able to see so many different versions of James Harden throughout his career. And this one, although there have been scoring spurts, has looked the most unselfish, or the least forced unselfishness that he's been able to play with. The third quarter kind of was indicative of that. We saw him go off for 7 straight points, 3 straight possessions where James Harden got a bucket. And then he used that gravity that he had earned, that he had gained significantly, especially against a hampered Sixers defense, to then attack the painted area and have the defense collapse on him, and then finding guys like Keon Ellis, like Dean Wade, like Jalen Tyson. And that also led to Keon Ellis having 11 points in that third quarter alone. How important has James Harden been? Not only the offensive threat that he is, and you can obviously go into the history that you've seen of James Harden getting to this point, Jimmy, but for this Cavs team, the importance of his passing, the size that he has to get open looks, and then also Dean Wade saying that he didn't know that he could see him in a corner spot because of the defense being so suffocating, and still James Harden being able to find him on a rope in his shooting pocket and create an open shot for him.
Yeah, the 29,000 points is one of those eye-opening numbers that sort of snaps us back into perspective. Because I think of over the course of Harden's career, because the playoff success hasn't been there and because of his performance or lack thereof in some of the biggest moments of his career, it can be easy to make jokes about him and devalue some of his career accomplishments. But like, this is a top 10 scorer of all time we're talking about. Former MVP. Fun fact, he's finished second in MVP 3 times. That's the second most all time. I think Bird, LeBron, and Jerry West are tied with 4, the most all time. So like a break here, a break there in James Harden's career. And we're talking like on a very short list, he's one of the best players of all time. As it stands, his legacy is a little bit more complicated, but he's still an all-time great. And you think about it, like those first 3 years in OKC, I was looking this up earlier. James Harden, thereabouts, how we got to 29,000. He averages about 2,000 points a season. Definitely some higher peaks than that. It's probably been a little bit lower than that. It has been a little bit lower than that as he's gotten a little bit older and shifted into more like the floor general chess James Harden, less 30 points per game James Harden as he's teamed up with, maybe 1A, 1B type superstars. I said to say he's never scored more than 1,100 points or thereabouts. It might have even been less than 1,100. Each of those first 3 seasons in OKC. I don't know how many people remember this at this point, what our listenership like demographic is. But like when James Harden went off to Houston, it was kind of an open question. But everyone knew he was good. He was like one of the main ball handlers. He would close on those OKC teams. He could take over games for those OKC teams. But he was playing with Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant. So he went off on his own. It turns out that this guy becomes the most depended upon superstar of all time. Like this guy is the face of heliocentric basketball. He like Luka Doncic, that sort of style. Trae Young, even like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Like these guys are all the kind of offense that those teams are running. Thunder, I guess a little bit less so than those other teams, but still pretty similar to what the Rockets were doing with Harden. What the Rockets did with Harden was so extreme, particularly before he got Chris Paul and Russell Westbrook next to him. Like the offense was so dependent on Harden and defenses were so locked in on him. We got to the point that this was probably once Chris Paul got there. But like Harden at his peak is getting trapped at half court. We're not even waiting for screens. We're to throw in 2 at him the second he crosses half court just to get the ball out of this man's hands. And the step back 3 was so deadly that teams for a time, a very silly time, were like guarding this man from the side, or even from sometimes like guys would like line up on his back, like start in jail. Think how crazy that is. That's like snaking a pick and roll. That's like kind of your goal, is to get a guy in your back. Guys were guarding him that way because they were so terrified of the 3-pointer, and then he was so good at drawing the fouls that they had to be careful how you contest him. The guy broke defenses during the peak of his career, and I think he's a unique guy on this list. You look at the other names; it's your Will Chamberlain, Michael Jordans, Karl Malone's, Kobe Bryant's, Dirk Nowitzki, obviously Kareem, a couple others that I'm not thinking of in the moment right now. This guy plays a singular style. Everyone, of course, all superstars play iso ball and ask their teammates to clear out and attack the defense. I don't know that any of the other people on this list, even like a Kevin Durant, ever had as much on their plate as an offensive player as James Harden did at the peak of his powers. And I say that to say, I asked Kenny about this after the game, it's remarkable because this is not just an accomplishment of talent, it's also an accomplishment of longevity. If we're counting just like total points, like you have to play a long time to get this many points. And it's remarkable how durable James Harden has remained. He averages about 72 games played, not counting the season because it's not a full season yet. But he's played about 72 games per season in the first 16 seasons of his career. Again, given all the energy he had to expend on the offensive end, he's the table setter, he's the lob thrower, he's the ISO scorer, he's the guy when you're looking for someone to throw the grenade to, you throw it back to him. He was playing on a lot of those Houston teams where it was a bunch of finishers around him and maybe like one other guy who were creating all the shots. Nothing worked. None of it worked if James Harden wasn't out there. And I always say that like the amount of energy you spend up on a possession is like pretty closely correlated with all the amount of dribbling you do. I mean, Charles Barkley once called this man the dribbler. No one dribbled as often as James Harden did at the peak of his powers, man. It's amazing. And I think that might explain some of his playoff foibles, honestly. Like the style that he plays is both high variance and sucks a lot of energy out of you, and the playoffs are intense. And like maybe at the end of these games, sometimes like this guy just doesn't have it, doesn't have the energy, doesn't have the legs. Step back 3 after some of the dribble series that this guy's pulls off. That's a lot to exert, but man, what a player. What an accomplishment for this guy. And then for the Cavs, the way he's sort of morphed his game now. Again, he's not quite the volume scorer that he once was, and I think he can still do it in spurts, but he's still dangerous enough. He still carries that reputation. He can still break down a defense to the point where they still have to pay him all that attention. And that's what you're talking about with, guys like Dion Wade and Keon Ellis getting all these great looks from him as maybe the scoring volume has gone down and some of his like more explosive movements. He's lost a little bit of that. His IQ and his understanding of defenses and all that stuff has only gotten better. He's an amazing guy to watch at this point in his career. He's still got enough of the juice. This is like quarterbacks talk about it, where like people think that you're at your best at like 25, 26, 27. And quarterbacks always say, no, no, no. Like it's when we talked about this with Donovan earlier in the season. It's when you still have enough physically to make the throws, but mentally you've seen enough, you've processed enough to where you can manipulate the defense the way you never could when you first came in your league and even came into the league or even a little bit after that. James Harden is like probably at the very tail end. I don't even know if you can call him in his prime, a bit past his prime as an athlete at this point, but he's like a supercomputer brain when it comes to dissecting defenses. So that's the part that the Cavs get to enjoy.
And to your point, Jimmy, based on passes that he made tonight against the 76ers, but definitely based on the pass that he made against the Boston Celtics, it's clear that he has enough to get these passes off. The physical acumen is still there. Plus, as you mentioned, the mental aspect to make a 60-foot pass to Evan Mobley on a rope in the perfect position for a lob before the defense could even get set. Right. And that's just the acumen that we talk about when it comes to James Harden, and something that I think people are going to be able to enjoy and respect even more now that he's not only in this stage of his career, but he's arguably has the most weapons around him. Sure, you can look to Brooklyn and when he had KD and Kyrie Irving around him, but who else was on that team? Really? Now you have guys who are in the top 3 3-point percentage shooters of the league, and Jalen Tyson and Sam Merrill at your disposal. You have an MVP candidate in his own right in Donovan Mitchell. You have two lob threats who are arguably two of the best rim running centers in the league, and Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. And then you just have these other guys around the margins, and Keon Ellis, who would not let it slide that he wasn't a 40% 3-point shooter over his career, right? Dennis Schroeder, a guy who is pesky and can get downhill and create on his own, and that creates for James Harden when he needs to get his offense going as well. Jimmy, you mentioned his driving ability and his orchestration in the pick and roll, especially when there was a time in Houston in specific where guys were legitimately guarding him from the side or from behind. It made me think about, is that part of the reason that he became this foul baiter? Because he had the opportunity to utilize the players on his hip as kind of insurance to, if you didn't get the shot you necessarily wanted, oh, I can just lean back a little bit and you're going to inherently foul me. Because when you're looking at the stats, and obviously I did a little bit of digging while you were talking there, Jimmy, James Harden is up to 29,017 points. 8,551 of those points are from the charity stripe. That's 29.5% of his points over his 17-year career coming from the free throw line. And sure, we were joking with Donovan Mitchell in the locker room today. It's seeming like since James Harden has gotten here, the whistle has shifted from James Harden to Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell got to the line 9 times tonight. James Harden got to the line 6. That's a difficult combo, especially in a playoff scenario where the defense intensifies. If you have two guys, obviously Donovan Mitchell doesn't do this as much, but he's getting to this point where he's using his IQ to manipulate defenses, especially out of a pick and roll, especially when he can get players behind him, like we were just mentioning with James Harden, to then get to the free throw line, calm his body down, get a rest, and especially with how he has been utilized throughout his career. The usage rate of this season, especially with Max Strus, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland being out for extended periods, Sam Merrill, you could throw in this category as well. And the exertion that has been forced on him, I think it's going to be interesting to see in the playoffs what version Donovan Mitchell plays with, the amount of thinking he goes into in every offensive possession, and whether or not he feels forced to maybe get to the line, maybe get a shot off, and all these other things, and how much he's learning just by watching James Harden. And again, Jimmy, this goes back to him in conversation with James back when he was on Utah. And Donovan, again, jokingly, was like, the first thing he taught me was how to travel in a step back. And just the game that he's learned from him, it's definitely going to be different, especially when you're having him right next to you. And Donovan is as intellectual as anybody in the NBA, can pick up on more things when that is readily available to you, even if it's just watching it, even if it's from the bench or on the floor next to it. And again, the rest that he'll get with James Harden goes ISO or goes into a pick and roll of his own and creates as well. I think it's going to be a fantastic dynamic. And that kind of goes into the two-man games that we've talked about with this team at length.
You mentioned the free throws. I think, unfortunately, that's going to be one of James's legacies. One part of his legacy is the foul baiting. Honestly, some of the rule changes, the rip through stuff. The league is supposed to not call a shooting foul anymore, but they still sometimes do it, selectively called. He was one of the pioneers of that. He was, and like, again, this is all to his credit too, because on some level, yes, it's frustrating and it's not always fun. I'll say the same thing about Shea. On some level, it's not fun and it's frustrating to watch. And, you're kind of gaming the rules. At the same time, these guys need to get you into those positions. They need to get you out of position to game the system, right? They need to make something happen. And Harden was so good, he's so strong that he was able to he was always really good at knocking guys off balance. And he always knew he had developed when he was in Houston, he would keep the ball out in front of him and super low so that when you would naturally swipe for the ball, naturally where the ball was, it wasn't there. But he would come up and then you hit his arm, right? Like, is that annoying as heck to defend? Absolutely. Is it also a great strategy to get free throws, which are the name of the game as much as dunks and threes? Absolutely. That's part of it. That's part of every great scorer. Every other person on this list alongside James Harden was great at drawing free throws. That's like one of the last levels of becoming a superstar. You're so good they can't guard you. They have to foul you. So I think that's part of it. I think sure Donovan can learn some of those things, but some of it is inherent. James was, like I said, uniquely strong. He had unique explosion. His dribble series, the way he could get guys off balance, lull guys to sleep with that sort of rocky back and forth, tween kind of game, and then get a step. I mean, that first step that he had was incredible. He's a little bigger too. That's my main theory at the moment of why Donovan doesn't get superstar level respect despite driving enough at some of these levels. I did the research a couple weeks ago. At the time of the research, Donovan was, I believe, 12th in drives per game, that is, and 26th in free throw attempts. And like 8 of the 11 guys who were ahead of Donovan in drives per game were like top 15 in free throw attempts, and a bunch of them were top 10, right? So there is a disconnect there. I think my main theory is that like Donovan's just shorter, so it's hard. There's crowded bodies, maybe people can't see. He's also this weird combination of short and really strong, so it's like hard to see. And when he gets hit, he doesn't like get shoved across the floor because he can take the pounding. There's a lot at play there. And again, like with James, he had just mastered that art. I think it's great for Donovan to be around a guy like this, a guy who, again, even though James has never climbed the mountaintop in the playoffs, he's been through some wars, man. He knows why those teams failed, and you can learn a lot from those lessons of failure too. So this is a unique experience that we're getting to see up close. Like not even 2 months into this thing yet. There's still room for it to grow. Although again, clock's ticking, as we've been saying since the trade. Dude's 36. We don't know how much awesome James Harden we have left, so don't take too much time.
Going back to my point about the manipulation of the game, right? Because obviously with the scoring, it helps that you are one of the best passers in the game as well. James Harden is number 12 on the all-time leaderboard for assists for the NBA. And that is part of the manipulation of the game. And I thought it was funny that Kenny Atkinson was trying to praise James Harden. And Kenny went, well, there's also the fact point where like he's not running at 100% all the time. And statistically, he has some of the least amount of mileage traveled for his career as well, or per season, or whatever you want to look at. But don't get me wrong, he can, turn it on when we need it. And obviously that comes in those bursts where he's obviously, as Jimmy was talking about, creating foul calls or getting downhill in a pick and roll to create a pass into the dry kick swing sequence, or whatever you may call it. I just think sometimes Kenny is so candid with us. Like, it is a pleasure talking with him every time, because you never know what anecdote or stat or conversation or historical note he is going to give you. Like, and especially when there's something that historically happens during a game, it always feels like he has just this extra knowledge that allows us to do our jobs even better, or have a little bit more fun with it, to calm the seriousness of the moment or something like that.
I think Kenny was trying to give James a compliment in that moment because I asked the question. I was asking about the longevity associated with 29,000 points. And given how heliocentric James's offenses were, like that's a lot on the body. Like they're like, how impressive is the durability part of this? And there's another LeBron corollary in here. Kenny keeps comparing James to LeBron as like passers and floor generals. And he doesn't want to compare anyone to LeBron because LeBron's so good, but like James does have the ball a lot and he does make similar, chess master passes, as soon as the defense rotates, James fires that thing out, right? As LeBron. So there are some parallels there. Here's another one. James rests while he plays. That's the answer. That's part of the LeBron durability too. Does he spend $1 million on his body every year? I have no doubt. Coaches rave. Every coach LeBron, Mike Brown was talking about it recently, about how incredible it is that LeBron is still playing. He thinks he could play as long as he wanted to because LeBron takes such great care of his body. Part of that is like sometimes LeBron just didn't play defense in the regular season for long stretches of games, right? Like sometimes he missed back cutters, sometimes he missed box outs. And by the way, pointing at his teammates like it was their fault after he did it, which is not that cool. But anyways, James Harden did some of that stuff too. Like, remember the famous video of James Harden looking like quote unquote his controller died? Like someone just ran right past him. It was like a Shaqtin' a Fool, like one of the top 5 of the season or something like that. That's part of this. That's also like James Harden is big and sturdy, and if you try to post him up as a big guy, he's going to stand you up. For all the accolades we're giving him from the offensive court, he's none of those on the defensive side of the court. Like, and again, when you're doing as much as he does on the offensive end, like we're gonna let a lot of that stuff slide because none of this machine doesn't even begin to work with you not out there. But what Kenny was saying was like it's smart for him to pick and choose when to rest. Like when James Harden gives up the ball, he's not running the Steph Curry gauntlet off the ball. He's good just being a spacer. He's good just being a spacer because he does so much with the ball in his hands that he is not trying to exert energy that doesn't serve him is how I would describe it, right? And on defense, it's the same thing. He's going to pick and choose his spots because again, the entirety of his career, everything at the other end has revolved around him. And it is a cut. Like again, Brian Windhorst wrote a story, I think during the 2018 Cap season about how like LeBron is doing this brilliant thing. LeBron is one of the slowest players, quote unquote. I think that was what it was. LeBron's one of the quote unquote slowest players in the NBA by the NBA's tracking data because a lot of the time he's just not freaking moving because the Cavs ask him to do so much at the end of the year. And LeBron, the other part of this is like LeBron was taking the global vision and be like, I need to play till June, man. Like, what do I care if I go 70% back in transition defense instead of 100% back in transition defense in this January game against the freaking Wizards? Like, come on, man. There are bigger things at stake here. So that's the parallel there. And like, is that a good thing? I don't know. Certainly your local high school coach would hate that, but we operating on a bit of a higher plane here. And for guys like this who are carrying so much weight on the offensive side of the ball, like the rules are different. That's just how it is.
Two things before we get out of here, Jimmy, on that note. We looked at today's game and we understood again that there needed to be a self-urgency that the Cavs had it. They've talked about wanting to have championship habits. They've talked about wanting to have a standard to play to, right? And James Harden has talked about that since coming to Cleveland. Well, they looked lethargic and like looked exactly like they were playing in the second game of a back-to-back on Monday night against the Philadelphia 76ers. So while James Harden and even sometimes Donovan Mitchell can get away with taking it easy on the defensive end for a possession or two. This cannot become an overarching view or an overarching standard for this Cleveland Cavaliers team that is built on the grit that they acquired at the trade deadline or built on the intensity that they've had on the bench all season long. Right. And that's why we've had this conversation throughout the season where there was a problem not with the bench having energy, but with the starters having energy. And not saying that James Harden and Donovan Mitchell aren't going to be able to do it when it's necessary, but there's still 17 games left. And I've been continuously questioning how the Cavs are going to use their final 17 games, whether it's going to be rest versus rust. We've had this conversation a million times, it feels like, on this podcast already. But tying this all together, there was a possession yesterday, and I wrote an article about Max Strus coaching on the sidelines and how much the Cavs need him and his intensity and the potential for the Cavs to play the Boston Celtics again, his size and all these things. But there was one specific play where the Cavs were in a defensive set. I don't remember if it was a zone or it just so happened that both James Harden and Donovan Mitchell's man were on the left side of the court. Both of them kind of get caught in a daze, like take one step closer to the painted area when someone was cutting to the basket, and neither of them watched Sam Hauser relocate to the corner and was just standing there. It felt like forever, but at least 10 seconds off the shot clock went off, and Sam Hauser was just standing there. And Max Strus is screaming, pointing at Sam. Please, somebody come get him. Somebody, you cannot leave Sam Hauser open. And lo and behold, I forget who made the pass, but it was like a long pass, and Sam Hauser just catches it, gets the laces how he wants them, and goes up and knocks it down as he usually does, right? Sam Hauser is a great three-point shooter, and the Cavs know that, and their three-point defense has been horrendous this season for that reason, because some guys get lost when they're playing off the ball. But Max Strus was literally like, after the play had stopped, because I think Kenny Atkinson had to call a timeout at that point, was literally just pointing after the timeout was called, was just pointing to the spot on the floor as James Harden and Donovan Mitchell. And of course, you need that accountability. But as much as James Harden and Donovan Mitchell are going to elevate each other on the offensive end of the floor, it's going to be incredibly intriguing to me in the playoffs, because sure, it'll be different for them intensity wise, the mindset that they'll have, all these things. But still, if they get caught off the ball and you don't have an intensity level player, you don't have a Keon Ellis, if you don't have a Sam Merrill, if you don't have a Jalen Tyson on the floor at the same time to kind of like run over, change their rotation to help out in those situations, there are going to be open looks. And against teams like the Boston Celtics, as we saw on Sunday, that can't happen. And I thought it was just extremely funny because there were moments in the huddle on the bench when Max was like, please lock in, like the intensity was extremely high. And then that play in particular that I just illustrated is something that is going to stick with me. And part of the reason why I had been of the mindset that Max Strus would make things difficult coming back. 10, 15, 20 minutes on the court takes away from other players who have already built up chemistry, camaraderie, trust with the roster, with these new guys that have just gotten acclimated. And who knows how many games Max Strus will have to do that. But in a series against the Boston Celtics, I think he's a guy that you might need, that the Cavs might need.
Absolutely. Coaches are always going to prefer the guy who makes mistakes of athleticism, which is to say they get blown by, but they are in the right spots, over the guy who makes mental mistakes, right? That's the stuff that drives you crazy, the controllable stuff. To your point about engagement with Donovan and James, it is such a tricky thing because on one hand, engagement, I think, flows top down. Leadership, those guys set the tone, right? So if they're not reared up and ready to go for, say, a Monday night second half of a back-to-back game against the zombie Philadelphia 76ers after a very intense game, comeback attempt against the Boston Celtics. Yeah, I get it. But it's hard for that not to trickle down to the guys around them who make their bread on their energy. And then you have a problem. What I would say to that, to counter that, is they set the tone differently. I think it would be great for Donovan Mitchell to be blowing up screens more often and staying attached to dudes' hips. That's that sort of stuff, right? But Donovan Mitchell can come down and get 7 straight. That's his version of setting the tone, right? And then everyone else sees that he's on his game. Okay, this guy doesn't want us to lose. All right, let me lock in and do what I do. can be a complicated dynamic at times for these guys who are so great in so many different areas and so many taxing areas that it makes it hard to do the other stuff at the other end. But they find other ways to set the tone for the energy guys who need to feed off of them. And by the way, some of this falls on Evan Mobley too. He's your defensive tone setter too. And like, I know it sounds like word salad sometimes when the Cavs say, "Hey, we want you to talk more." Like, that's not just like screen. Like, that's not all they're saying. Like, they want Evan to take ownership of that defense. Like, they would love it if Evan was the guy in the huddle, clapping his hands and pointing to spots and saying, "What are we doing here, guys?" Because he's the defensive player of the year, right? Like, he has more than a leg to stand on in that conversation too. So that's another version of leadership. And when your defensive anchor is passive, that can be its own can of worms.
And I'm not saying like Donovan Mitchell or James Harden are going to get caught in a daze off ball during the playoffs. This is like a regular season question because they are guys who, as Jimmy mentioned, need at times to take plays off to continue to hold themselves capable on the offensive end. I mean, tonight, as I mentioned, James Harden had 3 possessions in a row when he was able to score, right? Donovan Mitchell went on a 9-point stretch in the first 3 minutes of the second quarter because the Cavs, again, started slow, right? And again, against the Boston Celtics, Donovan Mitchell was doing everything in his power to put energy back into the arena that had been feeling the depletedness of playing against the Boston Celtics and the mindset shift that every fan goes back to of 2 years ago in the Eastern Conference semifinals where they just simply weren't good enough and couldn't do it. Donovan Mitchell is a playoff riser. We all know this. We've seen this. We've seen him do it countless times, not only in Cleveland, but in Utah as well. James Harden is a Hall of Fame player, right? We still have questions about how he's going to perform in the playoffs, but he is a Hall of Fame player. He knows what mindset he has to have to be able to play on both ends of the floor in the playoffs. So this is a question over getting the next 17 games out of the way, finding a way to maybe maintain their seeding while getting healthy and getting ready and at their best selves for the playoffs. That's what this Cavs team is trying to do. And obviously, Donovan Mitchell and James Harden are the 2 heads of the table to try and figure that out. But we'll have to wait and see how they pan out for the rest of the year. We'll have to wait for their next game in Orlando, and that's where Chris will be joining us again. But until then, that'll wrap up today's episode of the Wine and Gold Talk podcast. But remember to become a Cavs insider and interact with Chris, me, and Jimmy by subscribing to Subtext. Sign up for a 14-day free trial or visit cleveland.com/Cavs and click on the blue bar at the top of the page. If you don't like it, that's fine. All you have to do is text the word stop. It's easy, but we can tell you that the people who sign up stick around because this is the best way to get insider coverage on the Cavs from me, Chris, and Jimmy. This isn't just our podcast, it's your podcast. And the only way to have your voice heard is through Subtext. Y'all be safe. We out.